We have two wonderful presenters today. Dr. Chris Blake is in the English Language and Literature Department, and he is a TESOL person. He's the director of our TESOL program. And Jim Wilkins is a French professor. He's been around a little bit longer than Chris Blake has. And both of them are kind of famous for doing wacky things in class to get students involved, and also having a high level of academic quality and rigor in their classes. So I thought they'd be perfect for this presentation.
Thank you.
High expectations. Thank you, Carolyn.
You're engaged, that's all I'm asking.
There you go. Just please engage us. Please engage us. Well, when we saw the title of this, Chris and I talked or exchanged emails initially. You know, we thought, wouldn't it be fun if we actually found out what students think about strategies for engaged learning? Because, you know, we all have ideas and things that we try to do to get our students interested in the content of our courses, but sometimes, or rarely, do we actually know what they're thinking until we read their evaluations at the end of a semester. So Chris and I did a survey. Chris, you want to hand these out? Now, this is not the kind that you would use to write a research article or anything, but this kind of give us an idea what our students think about engaged learning, the activities that they find engaging, those that they find not so engaging, and then recommendations that they would make to a professor. There were 5 questions on this survey that we just did last week with our students. I think we said we had 100 respondents.
100, no, about 120.
Okay, so over 100 respondents to these. And question 3, we're not going to pay too much attention to because that was more course specific. So they had some things, you know, like, do we have to sing French songs all the time and things like that. So I'm rethinking that as an engaging activity for next semester. But the other 4 questions are the ones that we want to talk about and use as kind of our springboard for discussion today. And so, Chris, would you like to?
I really would like to.
Great.
And I just want to say too that this has been a great learning experience for me and has enabled me to engage with students more as I've given the survey out and talked to them as they come in. I just keep collecting information. I've had some good debates with other faculty members, and it's just good. It's really good I think it's good for us to be talking about this now. So.
Yeah, the last few days have been full of great ideas.
Great ideas,
great ideas.
Right? And we're thinking changing our courses up a little bit for the next semester, just based on what we've received here. So, we thought we'd get started right away by letting you look at number 1. And so, what do you think? If you were, what do you think it means to students? Think about a class that you are teaching right now.
How do you think your students would answer that question?
How do you think they would answer that question? Maybe just think about it for a few minutes here. No, a few seconds. What do you think? Just take a minute to, what would you fill in? What do you think your students would fill in for number 1? Write down a few, if you have a pencil, or just, what would be a few key, what do you expect, what do you think students would put down to be engaged? What does it mean to them? Okay, any thoughts? Yeah, we do too. Donna, we want to know what you say.
My students, and I'm thinking about my freshmen and then my upper division students. The upper division students really want to engage with the material. They like to have the opportunity to comment. They like to have the opportunity to bring their own questions to the class. I think with the freshmen, we have to work a little harder at it to get them to want to engage with the material.
How do you think they perceive engagement with course content?
Talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about it, good. Somebody else talking about it. Anybody else? What would be? Yeah, them talking about it. Somebody else? Brian, what are you thinking?
It's dialogue in the classroom.
Okay, so dialogue.
As opposed to just being talking.
Rolando, any thoughts?
Perhaps trying to integrate faith and practice, the practicality of our faith, something that the students can use in their everyday life as well. important, obviously, but how can they really put that in practice?
Okay, so dialogue, application, discussion, um, presentations, um, maintaining interest.
They may not say anything, but if they're interested.
If they're interested in the subject, then they are engaged. Right. Anything else that we've maybe not added to this yet?
We had an open dialogue in a 200 level class today. It got very transparent. And after that moment of transparency, they valued summary of what really happened just now. So I think it's one thing to have open dialogue and sharing. I teach in the SOR also, but they benefit in interpretation of what just exactly happened.
Yeah, it's almost like real time. Like this is taking place, let's apply it, let's interpret it right at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you ready to hear some of their answers here? Let's compare with what we just said. Some of this data I just literally an hour ago was still getting in because I gave it to students, brought it back to me today. But here are some common terms here. The number one that's appearing in one set is connecting learned material to practical situations and real-world applications. So they want to see some sort of application in some way of what they're doing. And I think this is where the discussion would be good here, but if it's mathematics, it might it's one thing. If it's a theology course, it's another. If it's a physics, nursing, it's another. But I think all students want to see, okay, here's information. Now, what can I do with this information? And I'm not saying that we're reducing education. I don't think they're saying we reduce it to, a technical school type of a thing. I think they're just saying, what can I do with this? Another one is attentiveness to lecture, being attentive, somehow that they are tuned in. So whatever is going on, that they are tuned in. Another one is enthusiasm. When I am engaged, I am enthused about the material. I'm excited about what I'm learning. And also active participation in discussion and topics, so that they are actively involved in the class. A few more. Jim, do you want to just point out what were some other themes that you're noticing?
Sure. In nearly all of these, they talk about the professor's role, and that's sometimes a role that we forget when we're talking about engaged learning, that we are actually highly involved in that process. And they keep coming up with, here's one thing they keep saying, the professor is passionate. The professor is passionate.
And that's number one, and that was interesting to me. I wasn't expecting, what does it mean to be engaged? And they flipped it back to the professor and said, when the professor is passionate, then I'm engaged.
Yeah, even one student said, when the professor is passionate and excited about it, I'm all with him, is what they said. I'm there with him, or her, yes, him or her, excuse me. And another thing that was pretty common on that one, Chris, was they're interested in the subject even when they're not in class. Their interest goes beyond just the classroom.
They talk about it with their friends, they talk about it when they're at lunch, they talk about it elsewhere. So it's not just in the classroom, it's something they actually want to think about beyond. Striving, so we had several here, still for number one, I'm engaged when I'm striving to learn as much as I can. So it's not the minimal, but they really want to go beyond the course, even the course requirements, to learn more. And also motivated to go to class. I'm engaged if I want to go to class. So that you have students mentioning, this isn't my favorite subject, but I was still engaged. I wanted to be engaged. When I go to class and it's not my number one subject, then I'm engaged. So anything else that you want to add to that?
No, but I would say that one about real world situations and making it applicable to the real world was one of the top ones. They talk about that all the time. They have to see the practicality of it, or the usefulness of it.
But clearly here in what we're seeing, the students want to be engaged, and being engaged is not necessarily doing their homework. It's not getting all the assignments in on time. It's a heart. I think they are connecting somehow with the professor and with the course. So it's something that is transformative is happening to them in the learning process. So any thoughts on that before we move on to the next point? Does that surprise anybody? Does that pretty much make sense along with what goes along with what we're thinking? Okay, number two.
Another one, a minor one. Well, this didn't occur that often, but requires action on my part. Mm-hmm. Whatever they're learning moves them to have to act, to do something as a result of that knowledge. So that was interesting as well.
I was going to say, I really found they want to be held accountable. They want to get in there to learn more.
Yeah.
And they don't like it if they don't think they're accountable. I mean, they may act like it, intersects with their lives.
And rigor comes up here quite a bit. They say being engaged does not mean I'm entertained. It does not mean pulling out tricks for me to do. For us, are you doing tricks? But and they want to be pushed, but at the same time it's at a heart level. So with the passion.
Girls and men to want to learn more. One of the best comments I ever read on course evaluations as a reader from my department is that, I thought I wasn't going to be interested in this. I thought I was going to hate it, but I love it. I've learned so much. I've worked my tail off in this class, that kind of thing. And you love that. I've been challenged, but I love it now far more. I'm not going to major in it, thank goodness. But this is, but wow, this has just really engaged me, and I've worked my tail off.
It's almost like that something caught them by surprise when they come into your class. They go in there, they weren't expecting something, and then something catches fire. And so I think that's really, for number one, a take home for me is that how can I create a classroom where students come in, and we're going to I don't want to steal the thunder from future questions, but it's that living at the moment, some sense of surprise, nothing is dull. But what's going to happen today in this class? Creating that suspense and that anticipation in our classrooms, I think, goes along with number one. So you were going to do number two, is that right?
Yeah. We asked this question because, we do a lot of activities, especially in language classrooms, TESOL, French and Spanish. You do a lot of like to sing French songs, which the students hate. But you do a lot of activities, and sometimes as the creator of those activities, you're not aware of how they're being received. The students here, and I've had this said so many times by our Encore students, the students here are so nice. I can't believe the students here. And it's true, they're very nice, and they'll do just about anything you ask them to do in the classroom, but they hate it sometimes. And so this was a very eye-opening experience for me, not just the singing in French, but if you'll take a look, what kind of activities do you think your students, now think of your students in your classes, find most useful in an active learning classroom or an engaged learning atmosphere?
Yeah, so for number two, what do you think?
Some of you have mentioned them already. You've mentioned discussion and things like that. I think that would fit in this category as well. Carolyn.
Really well in my classes, and I get always in the course evaluation good reviews about it. Is working on the board together. I just let them work in groups, and so they learn from each other, and not just from me. So.
In upper division social problems class, I had them doing research on contemporary social problems. So it's a 10-page paper, but I also have them present orally. And I had a student come up to me yesterday on the government as a social problem, and he said, I love the research, but I love being able to talk about it in class, presenting his findings. So there were two different learning activities there. One was the research, but the other was the oral presentation. And I thought that struck me as very interesting yesterday.
So letting them be heard, I think, is an important thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well, kind of related to that, with my freshmen, they have to do a presentation of their research. But last semester and this semester, I decided, how can I give them a real audience? So I've scheduled them into the Edna Minor Con auditorium for the days they do their presentations, and invited other classes to come in. And I give them a little bit of extra credit if they invite a friend or someone to come, so that they really changes the way they feel about doing their presentation. When they're not just doing it for the class, but they're doing it for a real audience.
Sure. Yeah. I've actually had classes where I've had in writing give them an audience where you, after they've written certain things, is to publish them, and I had them bound in a notebook actually and distributed to the whole class, so they had a record of what the others had written, on a cultural theme or something like that, and that too gives them an audience that I think they do appreciate. Would you like to hear what they said? Here's what our students said. Talking with different people, debates and discussions. Discussions came up very frequently. Collaboration, working together, but with a caveat that it only works well when it's evaluated individually. They don't like group evaluations. Lectures. They mentioned lectures and homework. Shock. Lectures, discussions, case studies. Chris?
Well, in the lectures is a curious thing because lectures are not lectures. Sometimes you would think, well, to really be engaged, you can't do a lecture. You have to do everything else except for a lecture. But really, students appreciate lectures, but what they appreciate in the lecture, it seems, is when it's not just monologue of the sage on the stage, but it is the faculty bringing the students into the lecture, so they become part of the conversation.
That term conversational
comes
lectures came up.
A lot, and so doing so, I think just practically, I'm realizing means when I'm planning my teaching and I have that lecture part, being intentional, thinking through what are the places where it would be a good place to bring students into the conversation, and what types of questions to ask. And they said, those, and I'm jumping ahead still a little bit here to number, I guess not, this is where we should be talking about this, but really, the professors who do lectures well are those professors who ask questions that, I think someone mentioned it here earlier, that really engage the mind and push them up in a level of thinking. It challenges them. It's not a question that is just a throwaway question. It pushes them. And then to bring in the whole class into that conversation during the course of the lecture, which I think is a challenge, certainly, to bring that in. And students really seem to want to have lectures that have application involved with them. So you were mentioning on the board having students doing work, and so it seems to me that what could be very effective, and maybe this is what you do, but is to have a time of lecture, but then have it, when you reach that key moment where it seems like enough learning has taken place, enough information has been given, to bring students into applying that, perhaps on the board, doing some work together, and then coming back to the lecture again. So there's a lecture and hands-on work applying what's just been given. So,
yeah, and again, it came up about the prof. The prof is excited. The prof is excited, and that's what makes an activity engaging. They also mentioned that they like supplemental sources. That they want other venues to investigate other than a textbook or other than a book, that's being read as a course requirement. And they mentioned that reading a textbook doesn't help, but other literature does. But other literature does help. And as Chris mentioned, the hands-on aspect to lectures and the ongoing conversation in those conversational lectures.
So I'll throw out here a couple of ideas that I've used in class, and I'd be curious to hear what some others have. But there was a course, Intro to Linguistics, and we are, of course, talking about language and talking about the history of the language. And so in that unit, one activity which I asked students to do was to invent a language. And so they had the components of the language. We'd studied, how languages are different across the world. And then after they had those parameters down, I said, okay, take those parameters, you come up with a language. And so they invented this language in class. And it worked out great this year because Wycliffe was on campus. And they both happened to be in class when students were presenting their languages and dialoguing in them. But something that I realized from this, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit to number 3, but students don't want to be put into projects like this without enough foundational support given. And so it's not that if I just give them a project, give them a hands-on, that's going to get them engaged. The scaffolding has to be in place so that they feel like they can succeed in that project.
Right. The element of being successful at the project, if it's collaborative, is something that they keep mentioning. That preparation of the activity is essential to the enjoyability of the activity. They have to have a sense of accomplishment. Chris.
Yeah. So are there?
Shall we go into number 3?
Well,
or number 4.
Number 4. Yeah. I'll go ahead and talk because I wanted to follow up on that a little more. Sure. So I'll give you another example of what can work and what cannot work. But last year when I had another project I did in class, and we were on the topic of social linguistics, and so the moment seemed right, and I thought, why not have these students do a social linguistic project on campus? And so I gave them some guidance on how to do this, and then they went out, and actually before they went out, they met together in groups and decided what their social linguistic project would be. And one project was, why do professors prefer to be called Dr. So-and-so instead of by their first name? And they came up with a good one this year. They interviewed faculty, especially in the language and literature department, and when they did the interview, the question was this: when faculty greet each other, do they follow the same prescriptive rules that they give to their students? So specifically, how are you doing? And the faculty, will they say I'm doing well or I'm good? That type of what's the response going to be? And so that was one of the questions, and they came up with a really clever way of getting at whether or not we actually respond in the way that we say we should respond. And the truth was they found 100% of those they interviewed do not. And so we say one thing and we respond another way. But it was very clever. But that was a social linguistic project. I gave them time to do it in class, and they did it around campus, and they came back, presented their data. It worked well last year, but I'm already getting some hints through the survey that it might not have gone so well this year. And I'm looking at why that might be, and I think what happened is this. I got so excited to do this project, the social linguistic research project, that I dove into it prematurely, I think. And so we covered more topics this semester than we covered last. So there was greater breadth, right? There was more breadth. But we didn't go quite as deep into a couple. So I'm trying to cover more. So we get to social linguistics, and because I had another unit, I had planned an extra unit in, we didn't have as much time on this for this. So what happened is I sent them off to do these projects, and they weren't quite ready, I think. And so I'm getting a little bit of feedback is we like projects, but we need more guidance. We need more setup for the project. And so what that's leading me to think, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, because I know you would have good ideas, but I'm thinking it's better to go perhaps into fewer units and to go deeper into those units, to give students the chance to do these projects, but to do these units better, to give a little more time, setting them up to do well, setting them up for...
Yeah, and I think that's why some students responded. One, I hate, capital H, capital A, capital T, capital E, group work. I hate it. And I think the fault for that lies with me sometimes, simply because the activity is not designed well enough to guarantee that everybody has equal responsibility in the project, and it's probably the way the activity is assigned. But now, those were not very many who said, I hate group work, but a lot of them complained about group work not being graded collectively rather than individually, and some people don't do their work, and I can't contact anybody in my group. And so we were talking in my office a little bit earlier about designing group projects and letting students in on the process of designing the project, because they're the ones that carry out the projects, and they know the things that they're fraught with. So why not invite them in on the planning of the project and how the project will be evaluated, getting their ideas and getting their input from students. I think that's a valuable thing to have. It's this student-centered learning experience that D. Fink talks about in his book on creating, I would say interesting learning experiences, but I know it's not interesting. Significant, yes. Significant, interesting, same thing.
Do you find the students would rather work in pairs or not?
Some of them do, but now in a language, the thing about it is if you have a smaller class, they're always working. If they do a lot of work in pairs, they say we get tired of talking to the same people all the time. So you have to switch them around. You just have to think of creative ways to make it interesting and engaging for them. I think on a larger project, I think they prefer working in pairs than in larger groups, simply because they feel more responsible to the others, since there are only two of us carrying the weight of this project rather than four people. The other day, I know I gave a project to my students. They had to plan a party, in French. They presented their party, and we voted on the party that we wanted to do, and that's the party we're going to have right here at Mayfield Commons. Next Tuesday night, we're having a party. They hired a chef. They got a chef who used to be a chef for Jimmy Carter, by the way, at the White House. He's retired, living here in the Charleston area. Brother F, you're not invited, but you're certainly William. I'll tell you about it after it's over. But and there were complaints in that some of the students did not carry their weight in the group, and that's the most common complaint I have about group projects, is that other students are not doing their work.
I think I'm realizing that it really comes from what I read. Students like to be in a class where they feel like they never know what's going to quite happen next, where the learning is going to take them. They want to feel like we're living on the edge a little bit in terms of adventure. It's an adventure. We saw that a lot, that learning is an adventure. And so things happen, and this is where it becomes tricky, because we all know we need to plan our course as well. There's nobody who would recommend, just by the seat of your pants type of course, where you never know how you're going to plan activities. That would not work. We wouldn't reach standards and all of that. But at the same time, students want to have the sense that the learning is so interesting, what's going on in here. I'm not quite sure what path the learning is going to take in this class today. And to do that with group work, though, in this project I was mentioning to you, it's tricky because you have to plan it into the syllabus, but plan it in a way that it doesn't look like another task for the students to complete. They want to have this sense of ownership in what they're doing. And so with group work, I like your idea, and this is what I plan to do as well in the spring, is these projects that I've done over and over and over again now and that I'm liking, I want to invite the students into the planning of those a bit more and to invite them, what are your ideas? How could this really work well for you? Create that buy-in for them. It's not going to work well on the first day of class, certainly. Even at the beginning, when you give them the syllabus, they're not ready to talk to each other. But if we create that environment where students are collaborating with us and with each other, I think we will get the type of buy-in into them doing the project. Any thoughts on that? Have any of you done that and seen that work well, where students help to plan the learning and the class, the experiences?
I didn't let them plan it, but I did require them to evaluate each other, and I told them at the outset that you're going to be evaluated by all the members of your group, and gave them a rubric that they were going to have to follow as to whether or not they participated, whether or not they carried their load, whether or not they did what they needed to do. Because I can't be there every day, but you are going to rate each other, and that will take that into consideration in your grade. So I made them kind of hold each other a little bit more responsible, and they seemed to do a little bit better with that. And I got some insight with, she wouldn't let us do anything. She did everything, and then, if anybody else offered a suggestion, that was not an okay thing. So then that gave me an opportunity to help them grow in those areas to learn to be a better leader, because it was a leadership course. I thought, how can I teach someone to lead if they aren't doing anything? You've got to get together, be part of a team in order to learn to be a good leader, be a good team member. But that was how I dealt with, because I've been in those teams before. So I tried to give them a little bit of responsibility for giving feedback on how's each one of them doing.
I like that, and I think another element that's important too is self-evaluation. Is actually giving them a rubric, or giving them the elements of the project that they can self-evaluate on. And it's amazing, they always evaluate themselves, I wouldn't say quite lower, but lower than I would evaluate them on the project themselves. So it's really kind of interesting. And it's good for them. I think self-evaluation is a good thing. Do you want to go on to question 4?
Well, I just had one more for question 3, actually.
Go right ahead.
We have time, right? And does anybody else want to share how, like, a journey where something you have planned into the class that has taken students on this journey that was unanticipated, a project or something like that? I'm just curious I'd like to get a couple more ideas here, at least another idea.
I was just gonna say, in terms of evaluation or having them self-evaluate, one of the things I've done, rather than say, I carried my weight, or I did this percentage of the work, is just to ask them, what was your role and what did you do? And they list what they did, and then, sort of roundabout way, they give themselves away if they didn't do much.
Yeah, I used to have on Moodle some rubrics for evaluating themselves and others in the group. And this semester I said, oh, don't worry about it. I think you all are going to do great. Well, they didn't. It was like, it really did not work well for me to poll that. So I'm going to go back to doing that again. I really think that having those guidelines in place where students evaluate themselves and others is really, I've seen it's a must in my classes to get the kind of work out of it. Yes?
There's a real benefit for peer evaluation, particularly when there's in small groups, and only the instructor gets those. And so if there's somebody in the group that's not pulling their weight, then I get to know that from a student evaluation. It protects their GPA, benefits the student. But then also, if that student should complain and come into the office, then I can say, according to your group members, this is what your peers said. I don't give the names, I don't show any of that, it's all anonymous. But so the student gets protected and the professor gets protected. So I'm a huge advocate for peer evaluation. And they think that we're a hero for that.
Yeah.
But we're not, we're just trying to protect them.
It also comes back to the way you set the project up. The way it's set up. You can set it up with as a process presentation. In other words, at certain points in the preparation for the project, they can identify what they are doing, how does that match what their role was supposed to be in this project, what do they yet need to do. So it's kind of a checkup to kind of keep, to keep the ones that are going to, the slackers, we'll call them, to keep them on task or aware of the task at least.
I also think if you have some of the planning and work happen
Yes.
You're there.
Right.
Yes.
You can see
Yes.
who's doing what.
Right, right. That's very revelatory. Yeah.
I even
I
talk
agree.
with them, I do think they need to group work, I mean, that's how life is, they're gonna go out to some job after Lee, and guess what, they're gonna have to, even if they teach, they've gotta work in college of teachers and
That's right.
departments, or if they're in corporate, or if they're in ministry, churches, I mean, wherever they go, you're gonna have to work with people, so
Absolutely.
you're gonna have to work with the slackers.
Sure.
So what you've got to do is figure out how you, even as a leader, help design activities. We actually talk about that a little bit in my class before we even start the group thing, and I said, okay, now how many of you love group work in this capstone class? None of them think they do, and I said, why don't you love it? And it's for that reason, they said, we end up doing it all. And in all of our classes, we end up doing it, because we're the good students, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, guess what, that's exactly.
That's right.
So, it helps them to think about how, and again, it's just so critical that every person is accountable for something to the group. But I do give individual grades, and I had one student this time thank me, she said, I just wanna thank you for letting us have individual grades instead of group grades. Which was a statement, I thought, and, but I appreciate, but it's good for them to analyze it, and to chip into why it works and why it doesn't, and how you hold people accountable.
And what I think we do in class is a microcosm of what we expect to do in the macrocosm, which is this integrative multidisciplinary learning. I think it leads better it prepares them better for that type of thing, as well as for the service learning projects and stuff that we're now focusing on.
Totally leave something out just because it doesn't work when you know that's gonna help them.
And a lot of times it doesn't work because of us.
Right.
We don't set it up right.
It's the setup, and you already said that.
Right.
It's the setup. It takes more hours of my time
Right.
to think about it. If something fails, it's usually because I haven't set it up.
It's like cheating. We've had this thing about cheating on papers and stuff like that. Well, there are ways you can set up something so
Exactly.
cheating is less likely, and so we gripe about cheating, but sometimes it's the fault of the exercise itself or the task. Yeah.
David, you were going to say something?
Well, just about
Yeah.
safety, I think that oftentimes people are uncomfortable with group work because they don't know their class members yet, or that kind of thing, and sometimes having some low-stakes kinds of interactions where you're building community and that kind of stuff before you ask them to do something big together might be helpful. Chris and I were at a conference last year, and it just drove me crazy. Every session you went to, you're supposed to interact with perfect strangers, and I just thought, just talk to me, don't make me interact with, I'm pretty extroverted, but it was just so threatening to have to get to know another person. And after about 3 sessions, you're just so sick of it. And so, I just thought, this is what is different in our classroom, is when we get a group of students who get to know each other, and especially when you get in the upper level classes and they're having other courses together, then doing group work is not threatening in the same way.
Right. And a lot of them said, we want to let us pick our own groups.
Pick their own groups and
Because
stay
I've
with
gone
the
through-
same group.
Yeah, I've gone through this
Yeah.
thing where I've tried to divide them by their learning styles, and try to put different learning. Gina and I did a presentation one time on learning styles, and we wore T-shirts, Disney T-shirts. I was
Sharing this.
I wore a Mickey Mouse T-shirt, and Jean wore a Tweety Bird T-shirt. Yeah, I mean, this was like at a presentation in public, but about learning styles. And so I got into learning styles, and tried to put diverse learning styles in a group, thinking, wow, that'll be really good, but it doesn't, necessarily. It doesn't necessarily.
I heard a presentation, though, at a diversity conference, and they asked the minority students, what do faculty do that help you and what do faculty do that hurt you? One of the things they said that helped them was if the faculty member signs the group.
That's interesting.
Because then they said they're not left by themselves, they never get chosen, or they feel like they're not gonna be chosen. And so they end up all the minority kids together, all the international students together.
That's true.
And they said,
Interesting.
if you would just assign the group, then we'd be with other kids.
So maybe we need to get hands-on in some ways, like making sure that they're getting.
Yeah, that was their feeling, that if they don't know, they're less likely to know everybody in the group. And so they're less likely to quickly engage with other people because they know them.
Yes.
And so they're kind of,
Yes,
because they're
I can see
marginal,
that.
they're re-marginalized
Yep.
when they're not chosen for.
Yeah, I see that. It's like being chosen for the baseball team.
Starts off with a group
Yeah, or
project,
not.
right? I mean, the first project that day one of class, hi, here's your syllabus, let's do it. Kind of general get to know you in class. But then right off to a group assignment, and with freshmen, this person says it's been wonderful to see how they start feeling retention's good because they start feeling part of at least a small group because they don't know anybody in there. So then they start knowing this small group. So it's all how we think through things and set them up.
So planning our classes for collaboration, group work, how are we going to set this up so they're engaged the whole way through? Donna?
I was gonna say, my sister teaches at a technical college, and she puts her students into groups the first day. And she has, in each group, they have 4 roles. One is the president, that's the person who does the talking for the group. One is the secretary who takes the notes. And then she has the lovely assistant and the mother. And the lovely assistant is the person who does what the magician's assistant does, like if somebody has to go up and get something or bring something to class, or they're responsible for doing that, making sure they have whatever they need. The mother is the person who, when anybody's absent in the group, that person's responsible to contact them, get them get an extra copy of the handouts for them. And they stay in those groups all semester, and in that group, they help each other through the class. They form a cohort.
There is something to that, and there's an author I was reading. I can send you the website to him. His name is Stephen Bowen, and he wrote an article on engaged learning. Are we all saying the same things? One interesting thing that he brings up are learning communities, and he said those can be large classes, they can be smaller, or they can be groups within a class. And this semester, I know I'm teaching a 16-student class. It's a fast-track class. Remember, we started these fast-track courses in languages this semester. And I think it's the idea of this being a pilot experience that gives them this sense of cohort that's not in any other class that I have. They stick together like a group. I mean, they go out after class, they sit together in restaurants and talk and study their material and review with each other, and they call each other if they're not there, just like the mother of that group. And these learning communities are really kind of a fascinating thing to me that I would like to be able to create more of them, within a larger class. That class, I think, kind of lends itself to, it's the right size for a self-defined learning community. Have you found that to be true in the fast track course? Yeah. They meet every day of the week. I mean, it's an all day.
And that's the thing too, 5 days a week, they see one another
Every single day.
That's the difference.
Right.
But they've done the same thing. They have a camaraderie that I haven't seen in my 3-day or 2-day-a-week classes.
And it does enhance their engagement in the learning as well. I mean, in class it's just totally different.
Students that miss class for sickness and they come
Yes.
the next day and I'll ask if they need a copy of the handout. Oh no, so-and-so took a picture
Yes.
and sent it to me yesterday. I've never seen that happen before. So I would love to see what is driving that. If it is the experience of the pilot, like we're all a group together, kind of learning how this works, or if it's the frequent contact with one another, but
Yeah.
I've noticed the same thing.
Yeah, interesting. We've had the same experience. Yeah.
4?
Let's do it.
All right. So 5, I mean. So what, is it 4? That's,
Not useful.
but I thought we did that.
Did we? Okay, then I'm on
I meant to do, we didn't do things not useful? Okay.
Talk about the not useful for
Okay, the things that are not useful, group projects. See, there you go. The number one thing that's useful is also the thing that's not useful. And my work assistant who's helping me this afternoon, he says, Dr. Blake, something kind of ironic here. And so I think that's what we've been talking about. What can be powerful in a class can also really cut the other way. So we need to plan carefully the engagement. Be so careful how we plan engagement.
Right, and we can't treat them like children either. They do not like turn and talk. And I've done that,
No, I do turn and talk, and they don't.
I know.
They like it with. Yeah.
They'll do it. Mine will sit there and do it, but I can see some of them rolling their eyes, and so I try to do it a little bit less. But anyway, like turn to your neighbor and summarize what you just heard.
And they're not big on singing your French songs.
Yeah, let's not go back to that because I'm really sad about that part. But they do not like group projects, and they do not like activities without feedback. I'm sorry to pick.
They do not like me sending them out to do things without being fully prepared.
Totally prepared, yeah.
They also, lectures, just straight lectures without any sort of visuals. It's just, no, please provide something for me to see for the visual learners on the board, so that's good. They mention quite frequently that lectures, they don't like if they're not engaging. And really what seems to come through here is the professor has to really care about what's being taught and present it with enthusiasm. They like stories, and I'll mention that next, but something that pulls the students in. So we don't want to write lectures off, but just lectures in themselves without anything else added are not helpful. Here's something else. The students do not like work. Did you say this group that comes back to them ungraded?
Yes.
Yeah.
They like
So that's-
feedback. They want feedback.
And doing the same thing every day, monotony. So we just cannot in our classes. We think that we love routine, right? We think that all of our students love routine. Here's what you can expect every single day, but they like it to be mixed up some so that there's that sense of this is a new day, there's something, spontaneous taking place, even if it isn't spontaneous. They'd like to feel that, so.
And one answer along those lines, Chris, were I prefer to wrestle with the content before discussing. In other words, they need time to reflect before they're able to participate in a discussion on it, which I thought was interesting. I'm sorry, Stephen.
I found there are some students that appreciate the same structure, particularly with the math class, that they're very unsure of the topic and the material. If there's some similarity from class to class, there's some sense of connection, what to expect in class.
That's interesting.
That's good. Yeah.
Interesting.
But the other students get bored if it's the same.
Yeah.
I was talking with a seasoned professor about this very thing, that students don't like monotony, but they do like the stability of routine, and she suggested beginning and ending each class the same way, except changing up what's in the middle. So like she will begin every class by writing an outline on the board of what they can expect for the next 50 or 75 minutes. And then who knows, whatever's going to happen, but then she will always close class the same way. So it enables her to provide stability and structure, but still provide a venue to change things up.
And it gives that students a sense of order when things are written down, that you know what's going on, and that they can expect that to happen. Good.
It's going from the known to the unknown, and then back to the known again, which is it's a psychological thing that is really good in language classes.
And the content and the structure for class, but still have variety in the pedagogy and the techniques that you use to accomplish that content.
That's right. So
They know what to expect, but they don't ever know exactly how you're going to do that.
And I think that's what one student put down, and the feedback to me is they did like coming in not ever knowing exactly what I was going to do, but that the activities, they had a general sense of what was going to go on. So that's right. Yeah.
They don't come in having read one thing and you talk about something completely different.
All right, and that goes to clarity on your calendar and your syllabus and stuff too, right?
So I think a common theme again is we're setting students up for success. If we're going to have a turn and talk, allow them time to think it through before we have them discuss it with somebody else. If there's group work, we plan it out ahead of time so that every student will succeed and not feel like they were carrying all the weight, or that type of thing. Number 5, can we jump there?
Sure. These are student recommendations for professors. And to me, this was the most interesting part to read. And actually, their comments fall into 3 categories. They fall into comments about the professors, comments about the content and the class itself, and then comments about the students, what we call the learners. Okay. About the professors, they say, let students get to know you. Enthusiasm came up.
Yeah, like
60%,
50%, all over it. Yeah.
Enthusiasm, right. It helps create a laid-back environment, which they enjoy. Good preparation. Students, it seems from these comments, know when you're prepared and when you're not prepared. Don't underestimate us. My professor, when they have love and a passion for what they teach, that interests or that engages me, they use that word. Kindness and intentionality and inspirational.
I like to make coming to class an adventure.
Yes.
We saw that quite a bit,
That's
didn't
one
we?
of the comments about the class, right, is make it an adventure. Make it an open format, but make it an adventure. So when I come to class, I don't necessarily know what you're going to do with this material. I know what we're going to cover, but I'm not sure how you're going to do it. And it's interesting because often you hear students go out of class, where did the time go? That class just flew by. That's the comment I like to hear, is that class just flew by, because they've focused on the content rather than on the 75 minutes that they've had to sit there in our fast track.
Laughing in class is another one. They like it when we laugh.
Laughing in class, yeah.
They like it when we laugh at ourselves. We like it when we laugh at what's going on. And I remember this. I started here in 2011. And I taught for a couple of years, and God started doing some neat things in my life and building my confidence in areas, and I began to loosen up some. And I had never been that way in class before. And one student who had been following me ever since she came here, she took all 6, a lot of classes from me. She's commented one semester, this is the first semester I've seen you really starting to smile and enjoy us. And I thought, isn't that interesting? She's noticing that, but that was the first semester where I noticed that I was becoming more comfortable in what I was doing. And it was that living by the moment. I just felt like before I came here to lead that everything had to be just, I had my lessons planned so carefully. And Jean, maybe you can help me out with this a little bit because she's been observing me. But I had everything planned so carefully, but there was that element of spontaneity and just enjoying the students and appreciating what I was doing. That wasn't there, and things really started to change when that happened for me. So, smiled more.
Also along those lines, students said they want the freedom to learn. So if there's something that's not being covered in the class, they want to be given credit for that or the ability to go beyond what's being done in the classroom. I've started in my classes this semester, well, I've done it before, but in a different way, but this semester, the last 5 minutes of class is, what do you want to know? So they can ask you questions about, if they're not ready for it linguistically, it doesn't matter, but what do you want to know about French or France or French-speaking countries in Africa? What do you want to know? And we spend the last 5 minutes of class, not every day, but at least 3 times a week doing things they want to know. And of course, it's usually, hey baby, you want to go out with me? Or how do you say that in French, Dr. Wilkins? Or will you marry me? They want to know how to say things like that. So, but a lot of it's really pretty content-wise interesting, the things that they want to know how to do.
We thought it'd be interesting if you would do this survey with your students and give them a few extra points, extra credit, something like that. Would you do it, and then we could gather the data and we could keep working on this, because I'm curious to know how it transfers over to mathematics students. I'm curious to know how it applies to students in religion, intercultural studies. I think if we got a sample across campus, we'd have some powerful evidence. So that's why we left it with you. And if you're open to doing this, we will send you the. We'd really like to send you. We can find out who you are today. We could just send you an email so you have the electronic version of this. You could change the directions and change things up to make it work for you.
Change your own write your own questions.
Yes.
It's interesting.
I think between now and next fall,
Yes.
if just this small cohort here did this, and we forward you the information, it would be a great summer faculty seminar presentation.
Yeah, that
for
could
the
be.
whole faculty.
I will tell you, after doing this, my mind has just been racing the last 3 days after I got all these results and thinking, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to change this. I'm going to revise this. I'm going to do this next semester with this course. It really, you get some of those things in your evaluations.
Sure.
But generally, our students are so nice on their evaluations because it's so personal to them. But on a survey like this, where it's more wide open, talk to me about engaged learning rather than talk to me about this professor, I think you get a lot of honesty that may be cached or hidden in other terms, but I think it's really much more insightful almost than what you get on a course evaluation, and much more honest probably.
And what we, just in terms of logistics, leave the name off, and what we asked them to do is
Yeah,
just
we did it
on the honor
anonymously.
system,
We
just
did it
check your name if you completed this form, and so they turn them in at the end.
I
Put
give them some credit for it.
Check their name off, but we have no idea who wrote the feedback.
I mean, some of them type pages. They type pages of responses to these questions, really long. Even the Encore students.
Put it up on Moodle.
Wrote what they said, and it was very interesting to get their perspective on engaged learning as well.
So you gave it to them and they took it home and did it, or they did it in class?
Yes, they took it home. I gave it to them on a Wednesday, and I asked them to turn it into me by Friday because of how soon it was we would be doing this. Some of them still turned them in on Monday, but they turned them in, and then I just passed around a sheet, and they just checked off their name if they actually turned one in. But I have no idea who wrote these comments or anything, but it was except for the Encore students. They bravely put their names on them. And I don't care, it was great.
You get your own feedback in the middle too, so you can see for number 3.
Yeah,
you
number
get your
3
own
was
course
good.
feedback, and then do you want to do it? Share it. We can come back and talk about share the data across different disciplines, and I have a feeling we have a good representation here across the campus. So thanks for listening today, and I think it's the start of an ongoing discussion though, and so.
And it fits well with what we're doing, the integrative learning thing. I think it just really fits very well with that. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.